Hello, and welcome to this special edition of the Clio Entertainment Creative Mentor Series. I'm Ashley Falls, Director of Clio Entertainment, and with me are Jesse Garrettson and Catherine Emilio, and we are so excited for today's presentation.
That we are. For today's presentation, we've invited Jesse Balzer, a PhD candidate in Communications and Culture at Indiana University, to present. As part of his studies, Jesse has heavily researched the Key Art Awards, now known as Clio Entertainment, and has become our de facto historian of the program. So to kick off the 50th anniversary of our program, we've invited Jesse to present some of his research and give a fascinating look at the past 50 years of the Key Art Awards.
After taking a hiatus in 2020, we are back in the full swing of things for 2021 and are really looking forward to resuming our usual awards program. We are open for entries now, with our first deadline approaching on May 14th.
We can't wait to celebrate the 50th all year long with you, and we're so grateful to Jesse for helping to kick things off. So without further ado, I'll welcome him as he takes us back in time to 1971.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here to share this research with you. I've been doing this for about 3 or 4 years and researching it for maybe a little bit longer than that on this particular PhD project. And as you mentioned, the Key Art Awards is kind of my primary focus, researching the history of those. And I'm excited to share with you some of the things I've found so far today. Basically, what I'm going to be doing is going over chronologically some of the major moments. We're going to be doing kind of a helicopter view of them. So we'll be dipping in for little details here and there, but it's going to be roughly a sketch at this point. The history itself is a little bit sketchy in terms of not being completed. Not all of the materials available, or I haven't been able to find all of it yet. But I'm going to go over as much as I can. I think that we've made some progress in terms of that research. What I'm going to be looking at primarily is archival material. So Hollywood Reporter, issues themselves, Los Angeles Times, newspapers in general. And also some of this is based on interviews. I've spoken to some people in this creative community. So some of this will be based on that as well. But again, it's going to be pretty much kind of a sketch, but I think there'll be some really interesting insights that'll help historicize this particular award show, the Key Art Awards, and then where it went to with Clio Entertainment. And in particular, I'm going to focus on the 1970s, the 1980s, 1990s, those kind of moments, because those are the moments that are maybe the ones that have been forgotten the most. I'm going to start with 1971, which is the first Key Art Awards. And the first Key Art Award winner was Johnny Got His Gun, which is the Dalton Trumbo film. And there were 6 nominees that year in 1971. And the thing to remember about that in particular is it was conducted in the garden of the publisher of the Hollywood Reporter at that time. So pretty small beginnings. It was literally a garden party, and it was done like that for the last 4 years after that. So 71 to 74 was conducted in the garden, and it was just for posters, and in particular just for domestic posters and print. And later in the decade, it goes on to include international posters, festival posters, other things, but still focused solely on print in the 1970s. And as mentioned, so it's taking place in the garden. As you can see from the Los Angeles Times, it was in the garden, same day or same week, there was going to be a wedding. So it was still a pretty small scale event, meant primarily for people on the inside, right? And even then, even a pretty small circle. It changes a little bit later on, which we'll get to in a moment. But the judging at that point, haven't been able to find a ton of details about how the judging was conducted, what kind of criteria there was. Again, the 1970s of the time period that I'm studying is probably the hardest one to get because the material just isn't there. But at the time, it was, from what I can surmise, was judged by academics, art academics, critics, museum curators, and staff of the Hollywood Reporter themselves that were also involved in judging it. But it's not until 1977 that the show kind of starts to branch out a little bit. So it moves out of the garden, moves to the California Museum of Science and Industry in 1977. So winners there, still all print posters again. Winners there were displayed for a period of a couple months. And then they would also travel around a little bit, right? So they were displayed at the annual trade event, the Show West, and other places, as you can see here again from Los Angeles Times. So it's kind of moving around to different festivals, different industry events as kind of a traveling display. And there's getting to be, at this point, some contact, outside contact with broader audiences and communities. But we don't really see that happen with any kind of regularity until the 1980s. The 1980s are kind of one of the more interesting periods, I think, for us as scholars to look at for the Key Art Awards, because that's when the show starts to really grow in a lot of different ways. So it's still primarily focused on print in the early part of the 1980s. But 1986 is probably a really interesting moment, because that's when the category for trailers is added to the show. The first winner of that was Jewel of the Nile. And one of the trailer editors, Michael Shapiro, whose name some of you may know, described kind of the event, kind of a surprise that there was even an award for such a thing. But he also described kind of, and this is one of the things I'm most interested in, is there's not a lot of record of the shows themselves or what they looked like, what they sounded like. But some interviews you can find this, and he said in his interview about it that the projector was in the room with us. It was a rented projector, and you had a hard time hearing the trailers. So it was still kind of a rough event in some ways. It was still, not televised and not very splashy, and not a very big show. And that begins to change a little bit. But one thing I do find interesting about this, if you look at, and I have one here, one of the things that I'm researching, one of the things I'm using the most to do this work is the catalogs that were published to go with the award show. This one I think is from 2003. But in some cases, they're the only record we have of what happened, is kind of a list of nominees that are in there. Some of you might have these catalogs. They're not complete. I don't know, maybe half of them. And they're kind of scattered all over the place, some of which I don't know if they were published at all for some years, or if they were. But they're very valuable tools to us to help understand what was going on at the events, what was being awarded, what the conversation was about nominees and winners. And you're going to see two images here of the two different trailer winners or nominees, and what they were doing in how they were being published in the catalogs themselves. The second one, the Die Hard trailer transcript, is probably my favorite, and it is kind of an amusing one in some way. So it's a little transcript of what the trailer says, the copy of the trailer. I've talked to a few people who were around at that time, especially in the 80s, and that these were, especially before the commercial internet, these were very valuable catalogs that they would show you, in a sense, a kind of yearbook of the industry, of what the creative industry, particularly in film at that time, what it looked like, and what work was being done, what kind of trends were emerging, and so on and so forth. So if you think even further, that you start seeing some new categories added in the 80s, such as standees, billboards, things like that. In some cases, this is our only record. These yearbooks are our only record of that material. So posters are fairly well preserved, trailers are pretty well preserved and cataloged, but stuff like that is pretty ephemeral. And so it's very interesting to go back and look at these Key Art Awards, not just the awards themselves, but the catalogs, that we can see what is happening at any one time in a part of the industry that isn't always very public in terms of who's making it and who's producing it. One of the things that I try to do with the Key Art Awards is to look at them as a way of looking at Hollywood from a different angle. You get a different vantage point, you'll see different things, right? And I think the Key Art Awards are really useful for that. Because they show you the significance of marketing and promotion within Hollywood at that time, but also shows you the different technological developments, right? You see the importance growing of home video, of internet advertising, which we'll talk about in a second, and other forms, that there's more places to run ads and show what the awards are like. And I think the Key Art Awards do a really good job of showing that to us. And if you look at the 1989, 1990 call for entries, is another very useful resource for us to look at. You can see that a lot of this will give you a sense of what submitting was like at the time. So in this case, you're submitting your posters with these kind of regulations on this poster board, and this many copies. You need stills for the trailers, and submit it on video, and that kind of thing, and how much it costs to submit at the time. And even on the other side of that, you can see the judging committee. And these are also really interesting for us as researchers as well, because they show us, who was involved in making the decisions at the time of what was good work, what was, not so good work. And it's a really interesting group of people. In the 70s, it was, art critics, academics, some people at the Hollywood Reporter, kind of various hodgepodge of people judging. But in the 1980s, it becomes more about the industry itself, judging itself. So you see kind of an interesting list of names here, like Saul Bass, a few others, who are, in a sense, stars of that industry, right? Big names. So it becomes more about, again, the industry judging itself than kind of others out from outside kind of looking in. And this even goes a little bit further. If you look to, again, 1989 was kind of a turning point, because in 1989, the advisory board was formed, or an advisory board was formed. And their mandate, from what I can find, was to make the event more public, right? To grow it outside from just being an industry event, but to make it a little bit bigger and splashier, to what they describe as making this essentially the Academy Awards, quote unquote, for advertising. And that's pretty much what happens in the 1990s. So the show moves out of other places and moves to the Directors Guild of America headquarters, which is in Los Angeles. And it stays there for a couple of years. And this is in 1990. In 1991, we have the creation of Lifetime Achievement Awards, which I think are a really interesting moment, trying to single out the individual artists who are responsible for some of the advertising that we see that is so ubiquitous, we don't always get to associate it with particular artists. We're used to talking about directors and writers and showrunners and so on. But it sometimes can be harder to locate the individual people responsible for a poster or for a trailer or a website. And you start seeing the Lifetime Achievement Awards trying to do that work. So the first winner of that in 1991 was Saul Bass, a few others like Peter Bemis, Don LaFontaine in 2005. So it just becomes an award to highlight individuals in a field that isn't always known for having individual credit in a really public fashion. Even into 1992, like I mentioned, the awards in some ways reflect the changes in the industry. That's one of the kind of through lines in my work when I'm researching the Key Art Awards, is just seeing how they match up to, or anticipate in some cases, different trends in the film and media industry. So you can see here from this image from the Hollywood Reporter, this is a call for entries, listing kind of the different categories, right? And it shows you that things have changed from where we started in the 1970s, right? With one poster or one piece of key art winning. You have categories for TV commercials, for packaging, for outdoors, for home entertainment, trade advertising, a lot of different categories and different mediums that are being awarded. And it's, again, reflecting the growth of advertising within Hollywood and within the film and media industries themselves. And then going on to look at the next image, this is also from the same award show, or leading up to the same award show from 1992. It lists, the importance of still kind of focusing primarily, or like I think the lead award at that time was still print-based. You can see the advertising here is showing, here's the nominees for Best Poster. I think that was still kind of the leading award of the show. But there's a couple other things to note from this, which is that it's, including Lifetime Achievement Awards. There was a special presenter that year and for a couple of years. So Tony Curtis hosted it for a few years. A couple other relatively famous actors or stage actors would host the show. And the thing that I find really interesting, which is at the bottom, which is it describes that there was a television version of the Key Art Awards that was put on ETV. The other thing I think we can also probably take a look at is, and some of you might have seen this one in particular, it's a fairly famous one, but the use of in-show films is what they are described in the catalogs as. Again, showing the kind of inside sense of humor that was being used, and also the, putting names to faces, right? People that don't normally get credit from where I might stand, right, walking into a movie theater, seeing a poster, not knowing who it is, or hearing a voice in a trailer, not knowing who it is. Films like this, like Five Guys in a Limo, this is from 1997 show, do kind of put those names to those faces and show us some of those people that are involved. And they also have that kind of inside sense of humor that the award shows had at that time in particular. And then finally, in 1999, a little thing called the Internet was added, and the Internet category, and it was won by the Mask of Zorro, right? And again, kind of re-emphasizing this, it's about following the industry, right? The award show is participating in the discussion of, what are these platforms? What can you do with them? And how are they an important part of the business of Hollywood and the art as well? Going into the 2000s and 2010s, a couple of things start to change. And again, it's still kind of following that mandate of the advisory board, right? Making the show more public, reaching out to more venues. In this case, 2002 was the student competition. That's when that started. So it's, trying to grow it to the next generation of trying to establish more of that talent. In 2004, the award show, Key Art Awards, moves to the Kodak Theater in Los Angeles. And then in 2008, a really interesting moment where we have the Lifetime Achievement Awards, and we also have a Visionary Award, which is given to filmmakers for their work with advertising and marketing. So 2008 was Judd Apatow, 2009 was Sylvester Stallone. So again, it's this movement to make the show more public, more of an event for everyone, not just people working in the industry. And that's kind of how I came into contact with it as well, was through things like that. And so the late 2000s, you start to see the show continue to move away, and in particular move away not just from film. The 80s, 90s in particular, very focused on film, Hollywood. But it starts to move out of that and move to different forms of entertainment media, right? Anticipating in some ways what happens with the shift over to Clio Entertainment. So you have categories for theatrical, for home entertainment, for streaming, for gaming gets added. New media, a category for integrated marketing campaign emerges. Even things that are kind of more of a fad, like 3D marketing, right? That gets added as a category at one point as well. And that growth kind of continues up until the end, up until Clio takes over in the next decade after that. And so again, if you look back on it, it's an interesting evolution, right? Moving from just focused on film posters in the garden of the publisher of Hollywood Reporter to being a much bigger show and a much more public show in the same venues in some cases that the Oscars take place in, and being more about more of a public-facing event that is meant to spotlight the individuals in particular who are working in that industry. So this is, in a sense, just a short overview, a little sample of some of the work that I've done so far. And I'm continuing to have those conversations with everybody, continuing to do the research. But I just wanted to underline at the end here, to underline why understanding this history is very significant. Like I mentioned, I think it's a good alternative history of Hollywood. I can tell you as someone who's been through film studies programs, the part of the industry I think that is maybe least taught or underemphasized in some ways is the marketing side of it, the advertising side of it, right? There's plenty of stuff about how audiences watch movies and watch media and engage with media in terms of reception. There's plenty of stuff about how movies are produced and how media is produced. But the advertising side of it's a little bit murkier, a little bit harder to see. And things like the Key Art Awards kind of bring it to the surface a little bit. And that's where I found this as a research subject. I also think it's really interesting to look at the Key Art Awards as showing the evolution or the development of the film industry in terms of technology, right? Different kind of like home video and gaming, and so different kind of things being added to it. The difference in style, you can see the different trailers that were done at that time versus what they looked like then versus now, and what the business looked like, right? What are the different possibilities in terms of promotion? Where can you promote, on what platforms? What emerges at that time? And you can kind of see from looking at the Key Art Awards that it just grows. Like every year, every issue of the catalog describes that there's more entries, there's more categories. So it's just kind of growing. And it's another way of looking at what marketing and advertising means for film and media. I also think it's really interesting for looking at authorship. We're used to, again, talking about directors and screenwriters and showrunners and movie stars and so on. And those are things that you can usually give credit for authorship to. But we often don't have the language, especially again in academia, to talk about what it means to be an artist who works on a poster or artist who works on a trailer, where your name is not placed on something, at least again, facing the public. So key art awards have been helpful for me and for others in terms of looking at what and who is producing media in terms of trailers and posters and so on. And it helps us to understand, what are those new possibilities, right? What are the new categories, the new platforms, and understanding why they've kind of become significant. This is, again, ongoing research, right? You can reach out to me if you have anything. I would love to continue to talk to everyone, as I already have for some of you. But as you can see, there's still a lot of holes. It's still kind of a very patchwork kind of history. So if anyone has anything, any material, if you can kind of help us put that together, I think that would be really helpful going forward. So thank you.
That was a great presentation. I personally learned a lot of new things. I know that Jesse has only scratched the surface, so I want to encourage all of you to be in touch. Send us any videos, pictures, or programs you may have stashed away in a box somewhere. I know there are a lot of 1980 after-party photos out there waiting to see the light of day.
Thanks again to Jesse, and thanks to you all for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.